This podcast is made possible by the listener members of Nashville Public Radio.
This is the Nashvillager Podcast. It's February 13th, 2025, and 65 years ago today, something started in Nashville that would become a milestone of the American Civil Rights Movement. I'm Nina Cardona, and this is your daily digest of what's happening around Middle Tennessee, along with a dose of historical context from Nashville Public Radio, WPLN News. Nashville's downtown lunch counter sit-ins officially got underway on this day in 1960. But the effort started several months before, and it started with a comment. James Lawson was a student at Vanderbilt Divinity School at the time, but he'd already taken steps to become a leader in the community of Black Nashvillians hungry for change. The year prior, he'd led workshops on nonviolent activism and found a lot of interest among students at the city's Black colleges. He'd also spoken at the founding conference of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, which was on the brink of becoming a major force in the civil rights movement. In the midst of all that, he had a conversation one day with a woman expressing her frustrations. As Lawson later told the story, she confronted him, saying Black men didn't bear the burden of segregation the same way that women did. She pointed out that women were the ones running the errands, doing the shopping, and interacting all the time with strangers. Public places had some of the most challenging segregation rules to navigate. Use this bathroom, don't even think about that one. This water fountain isn't for you. Only white folks can grab a quick meal here. And on top of that, people often act out the worst to people they don't think they'll have to see again. So a Black woman popping in and out of stores was an all-too easy target. Lawson really took her comments to heart, and that became the germ of an idea for demonstrating at lunch counters. Now, we don't really have those anymore, but before the rise of fast food drive-thrus, lunch counters were the place to grab a cheap and easy bite. They were located in the very places where folks like that woman were running errands, in department stores and in five and dime shops. And in Nashville's downtown shopping district, they did not serve Black customers. So the preparation began in late 1959. Lawson and a group of student organizers went to the owners of lunch counters and just straight out asked them to desegregate. I don't think they truly expected much of anything to come from those conversations, but they did at least give the businesses a chance to do the right thing on their own. The response could best be described as coldly polite indifference. Then came the really key piece. Months of intense training sessions. About 100 college students, mainly from Fisk, TSU, Meharry, and American Baptist Seminary, formed a group they called the Nashville Student Movement. They developed a strict list of rules that members should follow during demonstrations. Don't strike back or curse if abused. Always be courteous and friendly. Remember love and nonviolence. And then they practiced how to follow those rules in the face of intense opposition, how to sit still with a neutral expression as people yelled in their faces, pushed on their bodies, dumped water over their heads. Now, all of that and worse happened to them for real once the sit-ins began. Angry white Nashvillians lashed out in horrible ways. They didn't just dump drinks on the protesters, they put cigarettes out in their hair. They didn't just push and jostle, they physically dragged the students off the lunch counter stools and into the street. And why were they so mad? Because those students quietly walked into stores, sat on the stools of lunch counters, asked to order food, and did not leave when they were refused service. The demonstration operation was a well-oiled machine. Beyond the practicing, these folks had planned things down to every detail. They'd recruited white women to join them, knowing that as long as there were white customers, especially female customers, the businesses couldn't claim that the Black students were running off their clientele. Younger teens served as messengers. They watched outside to see when demonstrators were dragged out of the store, then ran to a nearby church where more student protesters were waiting to take their turn. Older members of the Black community shuttled them from place to place in cars. When the demonstrators were arrested, they refused to pay bail. Sitting behind bars meant that the city had to keep dealing with them. Basically, the jail became another venue for protest. And as their cases went before a local judge, they were represented by one of the most skilled attorneys in the city, who also held a seat on the city council, Z. Alexander Luby. This went on for about 2 months. To very long months. When things like that drag on, people can get exhausted and run out of fight. Or the experience can be a crucible that refines their leadership and sense of mission. And that initial action of the Nashville student movement became a defining moment for a group of individuals who would go on to even more action. It was the start for a who's who of the national movement. James Lawson, of course, but also John Lewis, Diane Nash, C.T. Vivian. Just a few examples. After those 2 months, things really came to a head when someone firebombed the home of the movement's attorney. Thankfully, no one in the Luby household was injured. But within hours, the students formed up for a different kind of action. They gathered with other concerned Nashvillians, mostly black, but including white folks too. Several thousand showed up. They formed a long line, 3 or 4 people wide, and they marched in total silence all the way from Jefferson Street to the public square. They were met on the steps of City Hall by Nashville's mayor, Ben West. And Diane Nash asked West a question that was genius for being utterly direct and incredibly simple. Do you feel it is wrong to discriminate against a person solely on their race or color? Something happened in that moment. Both Nash and West gave interviews soon after where each said they were struck by the other's humanity. Looking at each other face to face, they weren't mayor and protester. They were just 2 people. And whatever it was that created that vibe, it had a real impact on Mayor West. So he put aside the bluster of an elected official with prepared messaging about law and order, and he just answered her as an individual. His answer was that yes, discrimination is wrong. It's not ethical. It's not okay. And with that, the Nashville sit-ins became a success. The mayor's words on that day didn't hold any legal power over the lunch counters, but the tide did turn, and within a few weeks, those businesses were desegregated. It was a huge victory. No other major southern city had integrated a public facility in that way. No other student group had secured that kind of win through nonviolent protest. The entire country paid close attention. If you go to the Civil Rights Room in the downtown library now, you can watch the national broadcast, substantial, lengthy programming that sought to not just cover what had happened in Nashville, but really understand how the seemingly impossible thing had happened. The Nashville student movement continued to demonstrate for desegregation of other kinds of facilities around the city. Many of the members went on to participate in the Freedom Rides. Some of them became the heartbeat of this city's black leadership. Others took their place at the head of the national movement. Back in 2010, I covered the 50th anniversary of that confrontation on the steps of the City Hall. There was a program on the same spot, honoring the people who participated. Diane Nash was there, and I will never forget her response when a young woman smiled and thanked her for changing everything. Nash did not smile back. She leaned in with a serious expression. She wasn't unkind, but she was utterly no-nonsense when she told that young woman that everything had not changed. She said there was still plenty of work yet to be done, and she said she hoped to see that young woman on the front lines of continually pressuring our society to secure and protect equal rights for everyone. In just a few minutes, how an infamous incident helped put Mammoth Cave on the proverbial map. That's coming up after the newscast.
On This is Nashville, we're taking a journey into the identity of this place we call home. The old and the new, the glitzy and the gritty, the monumental and the human. What makes Nashville tick? What makes it unique? And where are we headed as a city? We're going deeper on the day's news, bringing you dynamic conversations and taking you with us out into the community. Join us weekdays at noon. This is Nashville.
Here's the latest from WPLN News. A state law requiring 16 and 17-year-olds charged with murder to be tried as adults is now in effect. Previously, cases involving older teens would stay in juvenile court unless a juvenile judge said otherwise. Now, juvenile judges don't have that discretion. The Tennessee Lookout reports teens will now be charged with murder as adults, even if they don't directly kill someone. This would apply for crimes such as sharing drugs that cause a fatal overdose or committing a non-murder felony that results in someone's death. Local counties are grappling with diversity and inclusion measures. In Rutherford County, the school board recently took back a prior resolution that had voiced support for closing the nation's borders. A board member clarified that the resolution was meant to support more resources for English language learners in a district that has been rapidly diversifying. Meanwhile, in Clarksville, a council member suggested the removal of a diversity and equity position with the Human Resources Department in the city. Instead, that measure was roundly rejected and prompted praise from officials about the city's diversity. Roughly 1 in 5 Americans need a license to do their jobs. Here in Tennessee, doctors, realtors, private detectives, and contractors are among a long list of professionals who must have a license to work. Professional licensing boards operate within state governments. They set standards for the profession, handle disciplinary issues, and can revoke licenses. But the boards may not be that effective at carrying out their duties. Vanderbilt Law School professor Rebecca Hall Allensworth has studied how these boards function, including the outcomes of disciplinary hearings across numerous professions.
The disciplinary process is really flawed. And if you thought that this doctor, this nurse has a license, and therefore they have not been found to engage in sometimes very egregious misconduct, then you might be wrong. You should do your own research. The licensing board is not always going to take an appropriate action in a disciplinary case that you might think.
You can hear the full conversation about licensing boards and how they work here in Tennessee in the This Is Nashville podcast feed. Mount Juliet native Butch Wilmore may return to Earth's gravity in about a month. He's one of the 2 astronauts who arrived at the International Space Station last June for what was supposed to be a short visit. But due to problems with the Boeing spacecraft they were testing, Wilmore and his crewmate, Sonny Williams, have been at the ISS ever since. The pair were integrated into the orbiting laboratory's crew rotation and have performed a myriad of duties, including a spacewalk. NASA had planned to bring them home on a new capsule currently being manufactured by private contractor SpaceX. But now, rather than waiting for the vehicle's completion, Space.com reports the agency is opting to use an older SpaceX capsule called Endurance. That launch is currently scheduled for March 11th, with an expected return to Earth for Wilmore and Williams later that month. The proposal to rename Nashville's airport after President Donald Trump now has an estimated price tag. Renaming and rebranding would cost more than $10 million, according to an estimate first reported by the Nashville Business Journal. Costs would include new signage, vehicle decals, and uniforms, as well as less visible updates like filing for new trademarks and updating some 500 contracts and documents. The airport CEO has called the State House bill a distraction, and the Journal notes BNA has worked for years to build and defend its BNA brand, including through lawsuits. Tennessee's U.S. senators are supporting a local push to bring professional women's basketball to Nashville. Senators Marsha Blackburn and Bill Hagerty have asked the WNBA to consider the city for a franchise, touting its reputation as a tourist destination. They proposed naming the team the Tennessee Summit in honor of the late Lady Vols women's basketball coach, Pat Summitt. You'll find more news anytime at WPLN.org. A national park in Kentucky with the longest known cave system in the world is remembering an explorer whose death became an international sensation. Floyd Collins died 100 years ago this week. From our partner station WKYU in Bowling Green, Michael Collins, no relation to Floyd, reports his tragic death led to the creation of Mammoth Cave National Park.
100 years ago this week, one story dominated the headlines: the rescue of Floyd Collins.
Collins had been trapped in a Kentucky cave by a falling boulder, and the whole wanted to know from hour to hour what progress his rescuers were making.
That's from a 1950 Times documentary on the most impactful events of the 1920s. Collins lived in Cave City, Kentucky. He was one of many landowners who took part in the cave wars of the early 20th century. They explored the extensive Mammoth Cave system, which had only been partially discovered at the time. Rick Toomey is a geologist and tour guide for the cave system. He tells visitors how Floyd Collins wanted to draw more business from tourists visiting Mammoth Cave.
So Floyd was constantly looking for a cave closer to the main road to try and find some place that they could get more visitors to come to so they could make a better living.
He soon scoped out Sand Cave on January 30th, 1925, but as another park guide, Jackie Wheat, explains, Collins would never leave.
His foot actually kind of bumps against a loose rock this rock becomes dislodged and kind of rolls into the passageway right over top of his ankle and foot. And he can't pull his leg beyond this rock.
Collins sat alone in the dark for roughly a day before locals found him trapped. Neighbors and family came quickly to try and free him.
People begin to take turns going in and out, in and out. This goes on for a couple of days, and they're just not making any progress.
All this action weakened the cave walls, and they collapse. Collins is cut off from the world entirely. The ensuing rescue effort became a national sensation. Congress took hourly breaks to listen to updates over the radio. Thousands came to gawk, pray, and help. Here's the mood described in that 1950s documentary.
The nation felt a genuine sense of frustration and defeat.
Wheat says rescuers continued digging to Collins until they reached him on February 17th, 1925.
But this was day 17. They see him, and he's gone. He had passed away, they believe, a couple of days before that.
Sand Cave is now shut off completely. Collins' grave next to Mammoth Cave Baptist Church has an inscription that reads, "Greatest cave explorer ever known." A year after the failed rescue, Congress authorized Mammoth Cave as a national park, in part due to the tragedy of Collins' death. Wheat says we can't ignore the role Floyd Collins played in the park's history.
The national park is also about preserving the stories of the pre-park families that lived here and not forgetting those people, because they played a vital role in what we have today.
To celebrate the 100th anniversary, the park is hosting special tours, visiting Collins' homestead, his gravesite, and an overlook of Sand Cave, where he was trapped for 17 days. I'm Michael Collins in Bowling Green.
This story was produced as part of the Appalachia Mid-South Newsroom. That's a collaboration between NPR and public radio stations in West Virginia, Tennessee, and Kentucky. We do this roundup of local news every weekday. Please consider subscribing on your favorite podcasting app. Thanks so much to all of you who've left 5 stars, a thumbs up, or a review in your app of choice. A little bit of love really does tell the algorithms that more people should hear about us. And of course, everything at WPLN News is listener supported. You can make a donation at WPLN.org. And that's it for today. Thanks so much for listening. Let's make this day a good one. And we'll catch back up tomorrow.